For those who may not know, I don't usually go out of my way to comment on current events here on the channel. I've mostly stuck to doing some audiobook stuff, music, and game reviews with the occasional theology video thrown in for good measure. However, there are occasionally things I want to talk about that I just never get around to, primarily because I'm lazy. That said, there have been things in the news recently, particularly in the world of gaming, that have just been getting under my skin to the point where I feel like something needs to be said. Really, it's just that I feel like I'm not seeing any balanced views on certain things, and it just seems like the extremists on both sides are taking over. On the one hand, you have the pro-DEI groups trying to shove the message into everything they can get their hands on to the detriment of storytelling and making good games, or movies or TV shows, which is what has destroyed things like Doctor Who. And then there are the people on the other side. My side of the aisle is vehemently opposed to the box-checking method of creating characters and stories, and rightfully so. Nobody wants to sit down and watch TV or a movie just so they can be preached to about the type of values that the current climate and the current corporate media thinks they should have.
Put a chick in it, make her gay!
We just want to have some fun escapism with maybe some thought-provoking themes or scenarios that we can think about on our own. This is why I've enjoyed series like Star Trek, up through Voyager and some of Enterprise. Sci-fi in general tended to do this very well, where there was clearly a theme or moral they wanted to focus on, but it was never at the expense of the story. The characters and scenario, generally speaking, got you invested and made you care about the characters, so you cared about what happened. Measure of a Man from Star Trek Next Generation and Duet from Deep Space Nine are two excellent examples of this. All of that said, my problem with my side of the aisle is that now the chronically online people are taking over, and probably the best way I can demonstrate this is with the backlash to the recent trailers and gameplay footage that were released surrounding the Silent Hill 2 remake, which comes out in October. For full disclosure, I've only ever played the first 3 Silent Hill games. Well, I played the demo for Silent Hill 4, which I heard was also really good. I just never did get around to playing the full game. Beyond that, I've heard a lot of people complain about the decline in quality of the series, so I'm not sure I've really missed out on much. Generally, most people agree that at least the first 3 were solid, with Silent Hill 2 consistently ranking at the top of people's list for the series, and deservedly so. I remember playing through it, loving it, and then reading an essay someone had written about the symbolism and psychology behind everything that happened in the game, which, upon another playthrough, made me appreciate it even more. These 3 games are games that, even though I only ever played once or twice, left a lasting impression on me. There was an HD re-release of Silent Hill 2 some years ago, but I never did bother. So when it came time for Konami to reveal that they were having Silent Hill 2 remade from scratch, most people were super excited about it. It looked like it was going in the direction of the Resident Evil remakes that began with Resident Evil 2, which received widespread acclaim. Resident Evil 3, not as much, but Resident Evil 4 was seen as a masterpiece as well, even though there were significant changes to the structure of the game compared to the original. By that, I mean, the game was more streamlined and the pacing was improved, and the story stayed pretty much the same, with a few alterations, mostly to some character appearance and the way the voice actors portrayed the characters, Ashley being a major improvement and a lot less whiny. However, over the last couple of years, there has been significant pushback against DEI companies, most notably Sweet Baby Inc., that have been blamed, rightfully so, for many of the unwanted forced diversity inclusions in a lot of games, including race-swapping characters like Saga Anderson from her reveal in Quantum Break for Alan Wake 2. Anyway, I digress. There are plenty of reasons to be sick of the box checking that has been going on in media. Still, it appears to me that my side of the aisle has now turned any and every change that takes place in a game as a reason to go on a crusade. Personally, this seems to be the result of being chronically online and focusing on this kind of stuff 24/7. In fact, many of the channels I get recommended now are nothing but videos complaining about this sort of thing. In some cases, there is legitimate criticism, as in the case of Assassin's Creed Shadows, a topic I'm not going to bother getting into since I'm sure you can find the criticisms and counter-arguments on both sides yourselves. On the other hand, you have the more ridiculous claims of censorship that have taken place around Stellar Blade, which I discussed in my review of that game, which, As of now, only 7 people have watched, so if you actually want to hear my take on that and the unhinged criticism on both sides, feel free to go check that out too. Going back to the main topic here, the backlash from my side against the footage from the Silent Hill 2 remake has been completely insane. Let's briefly go through this, and then I'll explain why this irritates me so much and why I'm becoming more aggravated with my own side of the aisle than those on the hard left. The complaints about the Silent Hill 2 remake have largely centered around how characters appear in-game, as well as some of the gameplay bits. Specifically, complaints have been that Angela looks fat, Maria doesn't look as skanky as she did in the original, the nurses aren't as sexy as they should be, and that the combat animations are bad. Let's look at each of these one at a time. First, let's deal with Angela. I'm going to play a video of the recording of the original game, followed by how it appears in the remake based on the footage that has been released.
Excuse me,
I'm sorry. I
No,
was
it's
just...
okay. I didn't mean to scare you. I'm kind of lost.
Lost?
Yeah. I'm looking for Silent Hill. Is this the right way?
Yeah. It's hard to see with this fog, but there's only the one road. You can't miss it.
Thanks.
But
Yes?
I think you'd better stay away. This town, there's something wrong with it. It's kind of hard to explain, but
Is it dangerous?
maybe. And it's not just the fog either.
Okay,
It's...
I got it. I'll be careful.
I'm not lying.
No, I believe you. It's just... I guess I really don't care if it's dangerous or not. I'm going to town either way.
But why?
I'm looking for... someone.
Who is it?
Someone... very important to me. I'd do anything if I could be with her again.
Me too. I'm looking for my mama. I mean my mother. It's been so long since I've seen her. I thought my father and brother were here, but I can't find them either. I'm sorry. It's not your problem.
I hope you find them.
Yeah, you too.
Now, having seen that, let's notice a couple of things. First, Angela is not, generally speaking, a very attractive woman. She's what the kiddies would call mid. Also, the voice acting is terrible, but in a very over-the-top Twin Peaks sort of way. It's bad, but in a charming way. The way she says, "lost,"
Lost?
is so ridiculous. And it probably won't be in the remake, but man, I hope there's an Easter egg reference to it. Anyway, there's a theory that her character design was loosely based on Sandra Bullock, but I haven't been able to confirm that. Now, let's look at the in-game model. One of the gripes I've always had with Silent Hill 2's character models is that they all look like they haven't seen the sun in probably a few decades, and the skin textures are just kinda gross. It's like when you look at some pictures of deceased people that they just pulled out of the water. Regardless, how old would you guess Angela is? I asked my son, and he thought she was in her 40s. And that's a darn good guess, because that's what a lot of people thought. However, she's supposed to be 19. Now, let's take a look at the same scene from the trailer. Granted, the trailer probably has some dramatic shots that won't be in the base game, since, again, it's a trailer, but you'll get the main idea either way.
Excuse me.
I'm sorry. I was just...
It's okay. I didn't mean to scare you. I'm kind of lost. I'm looking for Silent Hill.
I think you should stay away. This town, there's something wrong with it?
Is it dangerous?
Maybe.
I'll be careful.
I'm not lying.
I guess I don't really care if it's dangerous or not.
Anything look terrible? If you said, well, not really, congratulations, you're a normal person. However, if you didn't watch the trailer and you only had this image to go by, you would think they turned Angela into a land whale. However, if you look at the frame this is taken from, you can tell that she's not actually overweight. Incidentally, her jawline isn't terribly different from the original if you look carefully. In fact, it's odd that this is the frame they stopped it on, since the rest of the trailer makes her look completely normal. Also, here's her voice actress, Gianna Keel. So the character looks more like her voice actress, which is a trend we've seen in recent years, which I'm completely fine with. They altered her appearance somewhat to make her look like Angela's age in-game, but that's about it. Of course, then you have the people coming out screeching about how Angela isn't hot enough for the remake. I'm sorry, but did you not see her original character model in Silent Hill 2? That is not a 19-year-old girl. That is a woman who has had a hard life of growing up on the streets, chain smoking, and doing favors for crack. Angela was never hot. Granted, her FMV counterpart looked better if you can get past the uncanny valley aspect of things, but she was always pretty average. Even this isn't enough for the nutjobs on X, YouTube, and Reddit. I'll try to avoid spoilers for those who haven't played the original, and for those who have, you'll understand what I'm referring to. The argument is that Angela needed to be really hot because it had to do with James's backstory and why he was in Silent Hill to begin with. However, during the entire game, not only is Angela's character specifically not intended to be seen as a sex object given her own backstory, but never once does James show any interest in her whatsoever. In fact, here's another clip from the original.
Oh, it's you.
Yeah, I'm James.
Angela.
Angela, okay. I don't know what you're planning, but there's always another way.
Really? But you're the same as me. It's easier just to run. Besides, is what we deserve.
No, I'm not like you.
Are you afraid? I'm sorry.
It's okay. Did you find your mother?
Not yet. She's not anywhere.
Did she live in this apartment building?
I don't know.
So, all you know is she lived in this town.
What did you say? How do you know that?
Well, I just figured, 'cause this is where you're looking for her. How else would I know?
Yeah.
Am I right?
I'm so tired.
So, why did you come to this town anyway?
I'm sorry. Did you find the person you're looking for?
Not yet. Her name's Mary. She's my wife.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. Anyway, she's dead. I don't know why I think she's here.
She's dead?
Don't worry. I'm not crazy. At least, I don't think so.
I've got to find my mama.
Should I go with you? This town's dangerous. Now I know what you meant back there in the cemetery.
I'll be okay by myself. Besides, I'd just slow you down.
What about that?
Will you hold it for me?
Sure. No problem.
If I kept it, I'm not sure what I might do. Oh, I'm sorry. I've been bad. Please, don't.
Angela is clearly a trauma and SA survivor. There's no getting around that. Even the new trailer shows some of this.
I'll be good, I promise. Tell him I'll be good, please.
Oh, but then there's the complaint that her voice is too deep. That must mean that now Angela is actually a man who's taking hormones, and that Angela's backstory will all be about being abused for being trans.
I'm sorry, I was just...
It's okay. I didn't mean to scare you.
And what's funny, the dudes always look normal, don't they? That's what's funny about this. It's only with the female characters. Only with them. Nobody else. But she looks awful. She even has a pretty deep voice herself, gotta say.
I'm sorry, I was just...
It's okay.
I'm not really sure with that voice. It's almost like maybe that character's getting a significant change. Well, I can show you why that change has happened. Boom. They hired a DEI consultancy group.
Dude, is it me? Like, is it me? Holy shit. Did you guys hear that? Did you hear that? That is absolutely insane. It sounds like a little boy. That's what it sounds like. Or a trans person with a scratchy voice, man. They are not only ruining the design of the character, but they're also ruining the actual voice acting of the character.
I wonder if these idiots would say that this girl must actually be trans because she has a deeper voice than most girls as well.
My name is Caleb, I'm 21. Body type, I'm not a big guy. I'm like 5'7", always wear like platform shoes to kind of compensate for that. Honestly, I just wanted to get past the first round. I was kind of banking on the fact that I heard other voices out there being a little higher than mine.
How out of touch with reality do you have to be to think that every female video game character has to be some supermodel bombshell with a high-pitched voice in order for it to not be woke, which, just like censorship, is a term that is rapidly losing all meaning? When was the last time you people have interacted with the general public? Listen, you can have female characters in video games that appear more realistic and have a range of body types and vocal tone without everything being a conspiracy to uglify women. I've got news for you. Not every woman and not every man out there is beautiful or handsome. Some people are just average looking. Angela was always average.
Why would you say something so controversial yet so brave?
And only by ignoring the source material and reality itself can you say otherwise. I saw some idiot trying to say that this is what Angela should look like. I honestly can't wrap my brain around why this jackass thinks that this would be accurate. Angela was never supposed to be hot. She was an abuse victim who dressed very conservatively, probably to make herself less appealing to men for that reason. Now, it also just so happens that I disagree with others who think that her traumatic past would age her as much as we saw in the original. Don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that trauma and abuse can't cause a person to appear older than they actually are. I have no disagreement there. However, I have never met a girl in my life who had been a victim of abuse that was in her late teens that looked like she was about to go through menopause. I'm just saying that while I agree she could look older than her age, also depends on her genetics too, I don't think making her look like she's in her mid-40s is accurate either. Personally, I'm fine with her looking more or less like she's in her early 20s. That seems more realistic. I also think the voice acting is much better in the remake from what I've heard, and she looks and feels more like a real person than in the original. Don't get me wrong, if the tone Silent Hill 2 was going for was David Lynch Twin Peaks material,
Oh my god.
great. However, having a more serious and realistic tone for the dialogue and characters is good too. That's where I think the Resident Evil remakes did a good job as well. Next, we have complaints about Maria. This one doesn't bother me quite as much since I see the point they're making. Here's a comparison of how Maria looked in the original compared to the remake. Obviously, remake Maria doesn't have the midriff showing or the leopard print skirt. Her shirt is also different without the plunging neckline. In cinematics in the original, she is absolutely intended to be seen as a very beautiful and attractive woman. Her outfit is intended to be sexy as well since she's a dancer at a nightclub. The character model in game, however, doesn't quite translate that well. I mean, it's okay, but as with all the character models in Silent Hill 2, they all had some imperfections that made you very happy to see their cinematic versions, since those always looked loads better. So, part of the complaints about Maria is that the remake version doesn't appear to be sexy enough compared to her original counterpart. Some of this is going to come down to preference. First though, I do want to point out that the inspiration for Maria's outfit in the original was Christina Aguilera. Either this is the biggest coincidence in history, or the outfit was clearly designed after her wardrobe here. Obviously, I think it was the latter, and it was a darn good choice if I say so myself. I remember when Christina first hit the scene my freshman year of high school, and between her and Britney Spears, there were all sorts of debates over who was hotter. Genie in a Bottle was just chef's kiss, though. Having said all that, it's possible they didn't want to recreate that for fear of copyright issues, though I can't imagine that would matter since it's just an outfit. Then again, her outfit was very clearly late 90s, early 2000s, and perhaps they wanted to update it. In the original, James was 29, and the remake ages him up a little bit if I understand correctly, since the team wanted to have him seem a little more worn out because of his life. He's definitely a character where having him look older than his age makes sense, since if I recall correctly, he had spent many years as an alcoholic, which did a number on him. Back to Maria though. I don't even think her outfit in the new version is bad. We don't really get a good close-up of her, but she still looks attractive, so that's a plus. However, the biggest reason people are worried about the outfit does actually play a role in the background and the reasons behind her appearance in the game. Again, without going into spoilers, Maria plays a major role, and her looking seductive and alluring is a major plot point. That said, personality can go a long way in this too. So even if her design is a little muted compared to the original, if her flirtatious and seductive personality, like we see when they first meet and in the labyrinth, remain intact,
it doesn't matter who I am. I'm here for you, James. See? I'm real. Don't you want to touch me?
I don't know.
Come and get me. I can't do anything through these bars.
Then this may not be much to worry about. As long as she's attractive, flirtatious, and seductive, then I think the character can still work even with the costume change. I'm still on the fence about the outfit change, but I still think it looks good on her. By today's standards, the other one just sort of looks tacky, but I support the design reasons behind it. One last note about Maria. Some have complained that the remake trailer seems to make her seem too nice.
Where did she go?
I don't know. Let's look around.
This place feels so empty. More than the other places we've been. There.
Laura! Wait!
It's okay! We don't want to hurt you!
Again, This can only be because people haven't played Silent Hill 2 anytime recently. Here's an example of her showing a compassionate side to her personality.
So, what about Laura? Did you find her?
Yeah, but she ran away.
We've got to find her.
You really seem to care about her. Do you know her?
I've never met her before. I just feel sorry for her. She's all alone. And for some reason, I feel like it's up to me to protect her.
So it's not like that isn't present in the original. Keep in mind, we've only been shown snippets from the story and gameplay trailers. Let's not jump to conclusions all of a sudden just because we haven't seen every aspect of her character. Another visual aspect that has been criticized has been the nurses. This brain-dead individual, who I had never heard of until today, was whining about how the nurses in the remake are all flat.
James is not used to fighting, so his arsenal of attacks is limited.
Look at these nurses, man. Flat as hell. Flat as hell. The nurses got nothing. Nothing. And it's amazing because people don't even realize that Silent Hill is supposed to be the manifestation of your own desires and also just your own history. Like what you have actually experienced in life will manifest itself to a living hell that is Silent Hill. And in this case, the nurses were super overly voluptuous in the other game because they were meant to showcase James' sexual, like the way that he would view women. Like that's how it was. And now when they androgenize the women and make them super flat and give them the Pokemon Go treatment, you're essentially taking away a very strong feminism talking point that was in the initial game. It's very ironic that they even did that.
How is it that these jackasses have such a devoted following who don't even question what's being thrown at them? This is such an obviously false claim to make and incredibly easy to disprove. Along these lines, here's a screenshot from another recommended video. No idea who this is, but she reposted a tweet from someone whining about how the nurses have been made to look like men. For proof, do they use in-game footage? Nope, they use figurines. Here's the one they showcase on the left of a figure made by Good Smile, which is a great looking figure, honestly. Little bit of a butterface, but that's to be expected. On the right is a newer model of the nurse. Oh no, look at how flat she is. She practically looks like a man. Unless you look at other shots of the same model in different poses. Oh look, cleavage and boobs. Now, are they as pronounced as the other figurine? It doesn't seem to be. The real question is, which is more accurate to the game? Now, it appears as though most people are thinking of the nurse model from Homecoming, which has a sexier outfit and body type, minus the face, of course, unless you're into that sort of thing. And let's be honest, many of us would still take a risk with Melina from Mortal Kombat. You know who you are.
I'm scaroused.
However, let's look at the design specifically for Silent Hill 2. Well, we can certainly see the inspiration from both figurines here. Even in the artwork, though, you can see that the shirt still contains most of her snoobage. Let's look again at the complaint from Hypnotic.
Look at these nurses, man. Flat as hell. Flat as hell. The nurses got nothing. Nothing.
The claim is that the nurses are flat. But look at the camera angle. He freeze frames it up. I can do the same thing with the original game, too. In fact, look at this extract of the character model from the game itself and the angle it's frozen at. See? The nurse in Silent Hill 2 in the original version was flat. DEI infected the game all the way back in 2001. This is absurd. Let's look at the actual gameplay from both games. Here in the original, you can see that there are definitely curves around the chest area that indicate the presence of ample snoobage. And here in the remake trailer, you can see the same thing. In fact, look, the shirt is low cut here as well with some cleavage showing just like there was in the original. The miniskirt is still present and the design is faithful after all. These are not hard fact checks to do, people, but that means you have to actually care about presenting things accurately. Of course, this is not what these chronically online reactionaries are doing. They couldn't care less about accuracy. They care about rage bait and clicks. The last complaint has been that the combat looks terrible. On what world is that true? They also complain that the original game was scarier with the first encounter with the straitjacket creature whose actual name I can't be bothered to look up. Here's the scene in the original.
Is it dead? What the hell is it?
Now, I don't know about you, but first, the original game shows you right out of the gate that this thing is some weird monster and what it looks like. James follows it into this little alcove with the radio, stands 2 feet away from it, doesn't notice it there, and then suddenly acts surprised it's there. It's like, my man, you literally would have had to be looking in its direction when you climbed over the boards. It's plain as day. How oblivious do you have to be to not have seen that when you were going in there? Now, let's look at the remake version of the same event.
What is this? Hey, wait.
Obviously, the scene has changed to a derelict house. Some are upset by that change. I am not. Why? James is still an idiot for wandering in somewhere like that and just crawling into someone's broken garage. My job sometimes requires me to crawl under people's houses, but I don't do it unless I have to. James sees this nasty trail of stuff going into the broken part of the garage and decides to crawl in there. He's either incredibly stupid or incredibly gutsy. Either way, he finds the radio but doesn't notice the monster because it's on the other side of a wall boarded up by debris. However, when the creature stands up, then he notices it. I saw someone complain that James in the remake immediately reaches for the board. Well, Yeah. You know what he does in the original when he sees the monster? Oh, right. He immediately reaches for something to defend himself with. It's almost like it's the exact same scenario minus a change in environment. As for combat, someone said the combat animations looked awful. I couldn't agree more. Oh, wait, sorry, I was still showing the combat animations from the original game. Those looked like hot garbage. The remake looks far better, and anyone who says otherwise is intentionally trying to gripe about nothing. Lastly, I want to show you two other scene comparisons, both concerning the little girl, Laura. As usual, there will be the original, followed by the remake.
You! It was you, wasn't it? You're the one who stepped on my hand.
I don't know. Maybe I did.
What's a little girl like you doing here, anyway?
Huh? Are you blind or something?
What's that letter?
None of your business. You didn't love Mary anyway.
Wait! How do you know Mary's name?
What you got there?
None of your business. You didn't love Mary anyway.
What? Hey, wait! How do you know her name?
Laura?
Huh? You know my name?
Eddie told me.
That big fat blabbermouth.
How do you know about Mary?
What's the big deal?
Why can't you just tell me?
You gonna yell at me if I don't?
No, I won't.
I was friends with Mary. We met at the hospital. It was last year.
You liar! Laura,
Fine, don't believe me.
But last year, Mary was already... I'm sorry, Laura. Anyway, let's go. We can talk about this later. This is no place for a kid. There are all sorts of strange things around here. I can't believe you haven't even gotten a scratch on you.
Why should I? Wait! There's something I gotta get.
Later, okay?
But it's really important.
What is it?
A letter from Mary.
Huh?
I wanna go get it. Is that okay?
Yes.
Come on, hurry up.
Is it in there?
Yeah, in the back.
What are you doing, Laura?
It's further back, in the desk.
Laura! What are you doing?
Ha, I tricked you.
Open the door, Laura.
Why should I? I'm a liar, right? Want me to open it? Huh? Do ya? What's the magic word?
Laura?
Okay, I guess I won't open it. I think I'll just leave you like this.
You snotty little brat! Open up!
Laura, why do you keep running away from me? And how do you know about Mary?
Mary's my friend. We met at the hospital last year.
Stop lying. Laura, I'm sorry, I didn't mean.
Fine! Don't believe me! See if I care!
Hey!
Let go!
I'm sorry, Laura, but I can't let you just run around this place. You might get hurt.
Hurt by what?
Look, just stay with me, okay? This is no place for a kid.
Fine. But there's something I gotta get.
Laura.
It's important.
What is it?
A letter. From Mary.
What?
I hid it. In there.
You sure this is where you left it?
It's in the back. Behind an old pipe.
Okay, wait here. Open the door, Laura.
Why should I? I'm a liar, right? Want me to open it? Huh? Do ya?
Let me out of here, you little brat!
In your dreams, fart face.
Please open the door. There's something in here.
Sure there is. A big lying fart face. See ya, fart face!
Laura! Laura!
Anyone who says the original is vastly superior is just mainlining nostalgia into their veins. The characters still do the same things, but the execution is done far better, in my opinion, in the remake. Again, I enjoy the cheesy dialogue and bad voice acting in the original. That was one of the charms of the original Resident Evil as well. However, are we really going to pretend that more realistic character models, facial expressions, emotive acting, and better looking environments and lighting don't make it feel that much more suspenseful? As I've said before, there's no way these people have played the original anytime recently and are filtering everything through being chronically online, trying to put out rage bait for clicks, and nostalgia. In fact, just about all the footage I've shown from the original was captured by me yesterday using the enhanced PC version. I got hyped for the remake and decided to go back and play the original again, especially after all the whinging online about the remake. Incidentally, the PC version is abandonware and the enhanced version is free if anyone is interested. So does the remake deserve all the hate it's getting at this point? Doesn't seem to me that it does. Are there legitimate reasons to be concerned? I think so. Any DEI consulting group is going to raise a red flag or at least an eyebrow. We haven't seen Eddie at all in games, so who knows what'll happen with him, assuming they didn't remove him entirely, which would be tragic. They've said the plot will be largely the same, and the game is being tailored for a modern gaming audience, which is always an alarm bell. However, we have no idea exactly what is meant by that. For example, the clip from the remake with Angela, where she's clearly experiencing PTSD, is not in the original, as far as I remember anyway, at least not in that form, but helps to characterize that trauma better. If what they mean is it's largely the same, but we tweaked a few things here and there because it helps to flesh out the characters more and maybe give some more detail about the town, then okay, that's fine. If by making it for a modern gaming audience means that they're doing what Resident Evil has done and fixed some pacing issues and adopted some modern controls and game design principles while leaving everything else the same, then that's fine too. I have no problem with that. However, if they're also going to shove modern day politics and certain ideologies into the game, then that's going to ruin things. We have no idea if that's been done or not. We won't know until it comes out, and Rest assured, I'll be playing it and scrutinizing that aspect of things for you guys and giving my honest opinion on whether it's actually a problem or if it's being overblown. If there are real problems with changes that have been made, you better believe I'll complain about it. As for my side of the aisle, why am I getting so irritated with them? By focusing on a bunch of superficial changes, and Maria being possibly the only legitimate grievance I've seen in my opinion, you're discrediting yourselves. These complaints always seem to start coming down to how sexy the women are in-game. Has there been a trend of uglifying certain female characters that are based on real voice actresses? I think a case can be made for that, sure. Doesn't mean that every time there's a normal-looking woman in a game that isn't super hot, that this is also a case of someone trying to make women ugly? No. Are there cases where publishers have censored or made changes to push modern-day politics into a game? You better believe it. Is every creative change that has ever made another example of this? Again, no. We need to be able to look at these things objectively and determine whether or not that's what's happening. That also means being able to admit that we aren't mind readers and not assuming that our ideological opponents are monsters. They may be misguided, but I'm not willing to call them evil most of the time. I think what's going on with a lot of this is an overcorrection. There have been a lot of changes made in games and media over the years that have been unnecessary and were done to combat the male gaze or to be diverse and inclusive. This always seems to just go in one direction, and many times it's because the people behind it don't like gamers and think that we shouldn't enjoy the things we enjoy and want to force us to accept things we don't actually like. They cater to people who have no intention of buying these games in the first place, and gamers are tired of it. I get it. I am right there with you. But there is such a thing as becoming hyper-fixated on an issue, and then you lose balance and objectivity. Let me give you a quick example. I'm not going to go into too much detail since it would take a long time to explain all of the intricacies, but the general concept should suffice. If you study church history, you'll find that there were many controversies and heresies that were addressed over the last 2,000 years. In fact, there are still controversies and heresies that are being addressed even today, many of which were dealt with early on. They've only changed names and been revived thanks to the internet. However, what you'll often find is that many of these church leaders and authorities would write quite a bit in defense of true faith and against these heretical teachings. What would often happen, not always, but often enough, was that these men who were so fixated on trying to combat these false teachings would sometimes become a bit imbalanced. This meant that they would sometimes, when dealing with other passages of Scripture, tie them into whatever controversy they were embroiled in, even if that passage didn't actually have any significant meaning to the dispute at hand. Later on, other church leaders would look back and say, hey, these guys were dead on with what they were refuting on this major issue. Unfortunately, they went a little too far in some places, so we need to course correct here. The reason they were able to do that and look back and see where the overcorrections were is because these later writers and church leaders weren't embroiled in the same problems as their forerunners. They may have had their own issues they were dealing with, but they were able to be objective because whatever controversy was going on beforehand had likely already been settled and was no longer a pressing issue. Like I said earlier, I think we're seeing that with the anti-woke crowd in gaming as well. There is justifiable pushback to a lot of what's going on, but I think there's also some overcorrection going on that these people aren't seeing. The fact that rage bait generates clicks, which helps to generate revenue, doesn't help either, since it just perpetuates the cycle. This applies to the hard left as well. I think most of the outrage with Silent Hill 2 is unwarranted, as I've tried to demonstrate. Do I think the choice to change Maria's outfit was done because some feminist and DEI advocate on the board hated her appearance and thought her original design only served to satisfy the male gaze or some such nonsense? Oh, I can almost guarantee you that's why it happened, and I think it's a much more ridiculous reason than saying, maybe the fashion sense here needs updating since this looks out of style now, and we're not necessarily trying to date this time frame to the late 90s. Of course, even then, given the timeline of the series, I don't know why it would be a big deal to keep it with a late 90s, early 2000s aesthetic since that's when it was released. Still, If that's the only change that happens with Maria and she still remains the same as far as her personality and characterization and her interactions with James and Laura, then has there really been any damage done? Even if they get that wrong, but everything else right, is that enough to boycott and throw a temper tantrum? Not for me, it isn't. That's not a decision I can make for you or anyone else, though. I realize at this point that I'm probably just shouting into the void and that hardly anyone is going to see this. But I am desperately trying to get my side to maybe have just a little objectivity here and not overreact to every little change they don't like 100%. I realize that just going along to get along hasn't been working either, but I'm afraid we're overcorrecting and we're going to do damage to any credibility that we may have with people who aren't on the other side of this. People who are neutral on this are going to look at us and say, you people are nuts and all your complaints always seem to boil down to how sexy the women are in the game. Your rationalizations are just to cover up that you're all a bunch of coomers who have never interacted with a real woman and you're desperate for attention. When there are numerous comments like this under these videos too, that are all focused on sex appeal and seemingly implying that the most important part of gaming, not just in Silent Hill 2, is how sexy the women are, well, I start to think maybe they have a point, and that these people really are just desperate and horny and want more fapping material. One comment I didn't screenshot here went as far as claiming that the nurses may as well be trans because they all look like men now, which, as I've demonstrated, is absurd. Maybe that is all they care about, and the rest is just a convenient cover for them to whine about not being able to crank one out to this game like many were clearly doing to Stellar Blade. I mean, seriously, Maria needs boob and butt jiggle physics in order to be really faithful because it's what James would want? Is it what James would want, or is it just what you would want? Because honestly, that thought never even crossed my mind for something I wanted in Silent Hill 2. Look, the left has overplayed their hand, which is why they're getting the backlash. We don't need to overcorrect and overplay our hand either, because then we're not doing any better winning people to our side, and people will turn on us, and then nobody wins. Alright, that's going to be it for me. This has turned into a much longer essay than I intended for it to be, but I hope you understand where I'm coming from. I've loved gaming since I was in kindergarten back in 1990, and I've seen a lot of changes over the years. I don't like the direction some of this stuff is going in either, and even though we are seeing pushback in the right direction, we need to retain our objectivity, and not everything needs to be some sort of culture war battle. Using the fat picture of Angela in thumbnails is disingenuous and does nothing to bolster your credibility, and neither does claiming the nurses are now flat and look like men. Anyone with 5 minutes worth of time can debunk it and show you to not be acting in good faith. I have no time for it, and I have no reason to respect your takes on anything else if you're going to lie and push misinformation like that just for clicks. It's tiresome, and if we don't accept it from games journalists, we shouldn't accept it from our own side either. Give your opinions on why you may think something is a concern. I have. And then try to focus on what the positives of something may be. Try to maintain your balance and objectivity. I realize that doesn't get clicks, but I would much rather maintain my integrity by being honest than trying to rage bait people. Thank you for sticking around this long. If you liked the video, give it a like and subscribe. And if you hated it, smash the dislike button twice to really let me have it. Take care, guys.